guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're a new subscriber, welcome to my channel. My name is Alicia, and if you're a returning subscriber, then welcome back. So today's video is going to be on how I studied for pathophysiology and basically how I passed, and my study tips and any tips that I can give out to those who are planning to take pathophysiology. If you want to know more on how I studied and any tips that I can give out to you guys, then please keep on watching. Okay. So pathophysiology. So I took pathophysiology last year during the summer of 2018. I did end up passing this class with a high B, for any of you guys that were wondering, and I was just like, why not film this video for you guys? So I do have basically my tips that I'm going to be giving out to you guys. I know it looks like it's a lot, but you know, pathophysiology is a hard course. So when I was taking pathophysiology, for us, we were required to meet with our instructor once a week for a total of 3 hours. So you know, it was a lot. They did try to weed us out in the beginning of the course just because they just wanted us to succeed, and they just told us that this course is the foundation of how nursing school is going to be like. So my number one tip that I can give out to those that are going to be taking pathophysiology is for you to know your anatomy physiology too really well. Not just that you just basically just memorized your way out of the second part of anatomy physiology, but if you really did that, then I feel like you are going to be struggling with this course. I'm telling you guys, if you guys didn't feel so confident when you were taking anatomy physiology 2, then I would just basically just brush up on my anatomy physiology 2. Of course, in the textbook that we use, they did have like a section of it, like of basically a review of how that system worked and stuff like that, and then it would go on to the diseases. So the textbook that we used when I took pathophysiology was this textbook right here. So this one is the Understanding Pathophysiology 6th edition by Catherine and Sue E. So this is a textbook that we used, and as you guys can see, it's pretty heavy textbook, but our instructor told us that he was not going to go over the whole entire textbook. Like, there was not enough time for him to go over the whole entire textbook, so we would only go over certain types of chapters, and I think we brushed up on some of the diseases for like every system out there. So another tip that I can give out to you guys before even going to your pathophysiology lecture, I would recommend just to skim over the chapter that you're going to be going over in lecture, just so you can get an idea of what your instructor is going to be going over and stuff like that, and you won't be blank and just be like, I do not know what he's talking about. So I would either just skim over the textbook, or if not, I would just read the chapter before class. I know some of these chapters are like literally super long, and your instructor half of the time won't be going over the whole entire chapter. He would just basically go over the topics that he feels that you will see later on in nursing school. You skim over your chapter, and once you do that, you print out your PowerPoint if your instructor provides them. Our instructor did provide us with PowerPoints, and I'm going to be showing you guys. I did print them out, and this is how they would look like. Basically just a simple slide, and you know, I would have my notes. These are my notes that I would write during class. So like how I said, just print out your PowerPoints, and you know, this is like the beginning of how it was for us. I would always print them out. I would have my notes by the side. I would be highlighting on the definitions that he would go over, or that he would give us examples of. So as you guys can see, this is on chapter 4, and this is on tissues. So what I would do, of course, I would always record. If you have an iPhone or like an Android, because with the record app, so I would just basically record I would record the lecture. You know, you always have to ask your instructor if you can record. Some can let you record, some cannot let you record. I know in nursing school, some instructors don't let you record at all, so you would just have to you know, listen very carefully and just be focused in class in order for you to write down notes. But you know, I would record because they would let us. So you know, in class, when my instructor would go over a definition, he would give us examples. So I would write that down, you know, in a certain color. As you guys can see, in class I would use a black ink, and then when I would re-listen to the recording, I would write it down in a different color. As you guys can see, this is me just some stuff that I was not paying attention to. So of course you have to be like just highlighting what my instructor would go over. I would just basically just write down notes. As you guys can see here, this is how my PowerPoint looked like. I would write down examples. I would write down scenario questions that he would give us. Half of the time those scenario questions were kind of similar to what was on the exam, so look out for that. Once you write down notes in class, I ended up attending an SI session. So SI session is basically a supplemental instructional learning thing. It's basically where another nursing student tutors your whole entire classroom, but it just depends on how many people attend. That's SI. So I only ended up attending once the whole entire 14 weeks that we had this course. Why I only attended it once? Just because the first time that I attended this SI session, it wasn't really helpful to me, but you know, everybody studies differently and everybody works differently. There's people that like to go to these SI sessions and they do really well on their exams and stuff like that, but for me personally, I only attended it once, and you know, she did end up giving me some helpful tips and stuff like that, and you know, giving us some recommendations on what books to use or how to do concept maps and stuff like that. So if your school does provide you guys with an SI, I would recommend to go to it, just because they do games, they do tutoring, they review the information, they basically just try to help you out. So like how I said, I only attended it once, and you know, I feel like I did learn, but it was not my studying method. So find out what works for you when it comes to studying for this class. So another tip that I can give for you guys is to watch YouTube videos. So I would recommend Registered Nurse RN. I'll probably have her link down below for any of you guys that were wondering. She is amazing when it comes to videos. So what I would do when it would come to studying, like how I said, I would skim the textbook before class, or my PowerPoints, I would print them out. Half of the semester I stopped printing out my PowerPoints, and I would just still record my lectures, of course, but you know, on the note tab that PowerPoint does offer, just write down my notes from there and highlight and stuff like that. That's what I did the second half of the semester, but the beginning half of the semester I would just print out my PowerPoints. Like how I said, I would write down my notes, and once the class was over with, I would go to the library, and you know, I would just re-listen to my lecture, and you know, I would just basically just write down what I would miss from my lecture, and then I would go back into the textbook, read those sections that my instructor would focus on, and from there I would watch Registered Nurse RN, just because she would continue to go on with the topic. And you know, she did have quizzes on her website, and I would just do those, and I would do concept maps. I would talk about concept maps later on in this video. I also feel like concept maps helped me out a lot. My instructor would tell us to do concept maps because it cuts your study time in half, and you won't have to be writing down your whole entire PowerPoint when you have it in front of you, and you can just write down what is required for your concept map. And that I could throw out to you guys is for you guys to study to understand the material, not to study to memorize the material. That is not how this class works. You know, in anatomy, physiology, and microbiology, we would all be used to just, you know, memorizing our way throughout those classes. For this class, that is not how it works. In the beginning of the class, I would just tell myself, like, damn, like I really need to understand how this disease works, why we get those risk factors, why we need that treatment, why we get those symptoms, what is like the pathophysiology of this disease. Like, it's not going to be me memorizing my way throughout these definitions and just know the basics of the diseases, when in reality it just was not like that. Like, you really need to understand how that disease works. So if you are going to be taking that class, please do not try to memorize your way throughout this class. If you do, then you know, props to you. I feel like this class is just like how I said, the foundation of nursing school, and that's how nursing school is going to be like once you start. So please don't try to memorize your way out and just for you to get an A in this class. Another tip that I can give out to you guys is to pay attention if your professor keeps repeating something. My instructor would always try to repeat something, and he would just give us scenario questions, and he would just be like, oh, what would happen if this patient had this type of disease? What would be the symptoms? And he would just basically quiz us as he was lecturing. And you know, he would go around the classroom and, you know, ask the students just to see who was paying attention, who was it. So make sure if your instructor keeps repeating a certain topic, then you know that that's going to be on the exam. My instructor would give us my instructor would basically just tell us what was going to be on the exam and what to focus on. You know, if he didn't go over it in class, then that was not going to be on our exam. So also look out for that. If your instructor does, you know, throw out hints and stuff like that, half of the time that's what is going to be on your exam. Okay, so what I would do also when it would come for me to studying is I would just print out the key points and objectives. So for us, our instructor, he ended up giving us key points and objectives, and as you guys can see, these were the key points and objectives, and half of the time you can find these in your textbook summary of that certain type of chapter that your instructor is going to be going over. So as you guys can see, this is what it looks like. This was chapter 4, and you know, half of the time I would go over this, and you know, I would just circle what my instructor would go over. And you know, here are the objectives. There are 15 questions, and you know, I feel like if you know these 15 questions, it's just more review for you to do. I would also do the objectives, and I feel like they helped me out, because I feel like if I knew or understood the objectives, then I feel like I kind of understood the chapter. So I would just, you know, answer the objectives. You know, it would kind of be like a helpful study review questions. My instructors did not give us study guides, you guys, at all. So you know, welcome to nursing school. There are going to be classes that are going to give you study guides, some classes that aren't going to be giving you study guides. My instructors didn't really believe in study guides at all, the instructor that I did have, because he felt like people would just study the study guide and they wouldn't study the material. Like they would just memorize the whole entire study guide. So you know, it was hard for me, just because you know, I was used to my instructors giving me study guides. You know, like for microbiology and like anatomy physiology, my instructors would always give me study guides, and you know, I would just basically just study the study guide and I would be fine. But for this class, there was no study guide. So you know, that was like kind of hard on me. So I had to basically get an idea of me just studying with the material that I had, with the PowerPoint, with me just doing these objectives and the key points, going over them, me basically just reading the textbook, me reading the PowerPoint, reading my notes, watching YouTube videos, doing the concept maps also helped me out. And I feel like that's how I studied. Some people would do Quizlet, would just memorize their way out through pathophysiology, but for me, in my case, you know, this was new material to me, and I had to basically use a lot of sources in order for me to pass this course. Okay, I'm gonna be getting into quizzes. So for my course, we had, I think we had a total of 3 to 4 quizzes. I'm not 100% sure. I really do not remember how many quizzes we did have, but one of the quizzes that we did have was on lab values. And I remember my instructor. I did have 2 instructors. One of them was a nursing instructor and the other one was like an anatomy physiology 2 instructor. So our nursing instructor one day told us, you guys are going to have a quiz on lab values, and these lab values, you guys are going to be seeing them once you get into nursing school. So these were my lab values. As you guys can see, they're just definition lab values. Some of them have numbers on them. Some of them do have numbers on them for any of you guys that were wondering. And then we had to know like the pellet count, what each one was, and also normal blood test, as you guys can see. So it was a lot for knowing these lab values. Like I didn't think that this class was going to be about like us learning lab values, so I was just surprised on that. But how I studied for my lab values was I would just color code. Color coding was my best friend when it came for me to studying for this course. As you guys can see, this is how I color coded. Like I would highlight every word, and you know, I would go in with different color pens, and you know, I feel like that helped me out tremendously. Of course, I would write them down. A lot of people just memorize the numbers and use flashcards and they would be fine, but for me, I didn't use flashcards because I feel like that didn't help me when I had to understand these lab values. You know, here's more color coding for any of you guys that were wondering. And then basically what I would do is just like, you know, I would just say these out loud, and I would ask myself like what it was and like what were the numbers, and you know, I would just write them down and just repeating them until like I feel like I was confident enough to understand this. But I feel like for lab values, you can either just write them down and say them out loud, or you can just use flashcards. The majority of the people that I asked how they study for lab values, they would just use Quizlet, and you know, they ended up acing the quiz for lab values. So like how I said, I would just, when it would come to quizzes, you basically just had to study the material and understand it. But this was just 1 out of the 4 quizzes. So for the quizzes that were in the classroom, we basically had to like keep up with our readings and understand that chapter really well. So like I feel like that was also good. A good thing from this class is that we always had to be on track with our readings and just studying and just not falling behind, because we always had quizzes like the first 4 weeks, and then like the rest of the semester they just stopped giving us quizzes. So now on for exams. So like how I said, we had no study guide provided at all. Or like how I said, my instructor didn't believe in study guides or anything. You know, I would just read my PowerPoints and my notes. I would rewatch YouTube videos. There's Quizlet. Half of the time I would just quiz myself on Quizlet. Like I would just type in on Quizlet like the chapter that I was going over, and you know, like a lot of Quizlets would come up, and you know, I would just basically just quiz myself on that. And of course I did have a study group in the beginning of the semester. We would always meet, and you know, we would always read the textbook together. We would look over our notes, we would compare our notes, we would go on Quizlet and like, you know, just quiz ourselves. And I feel like that helped me out tremendously, just because like I feel like if you don't really understand something, that's why you have your study group for, like they'll explain it to you. What I can give out to you guys is that you guys are going to be seeing a lot of case scenario questions, so basically more like case studies but on your exams. So I know I forgot to include this, but I know I forgot to say this, but when it comes to you taking your exams or your quizzes, you're going to be seeing a lot of case scenario questions. It's not more like how it was in microbiology or anatomy physiology, where you would just see definition questions and it would just be straightforward. For this class, like how I said, you guys are going to be seeing a lot of case scenario questions. These questions I was kind of used to, just because the instructor that I took for anatomy physiology, he would always give us case studies to do in class, and I feel like that helped me out a lot. I feel like I was used to it because like we would always have that for homework in my anatomy physiology or microbiology class. And I feel like when it came to the exam, like I kind of like got an idea of how our exam was going to be, just because our instructor would tell us like, you guys are going to be seeing a lot of case scenario questions, and you know, when you're taking your exam, of course, don't stress yourself out when you see these case scenario questions. So a tip for when you are taking your exam that I can give out to you guys, from what my instructor told us, he told us this in the beginning of the course: when you have those case scenario questions on your exam, for you to read the first sentence and the last sentence, and it basically just tells you what you are looking for. So the mistake that I made the first exam is I would read the whole entire scenario question, and like, you know, it would throw me off because I would just ask myself like, what is it asking? Like, I don't know nothing about I don't really know that much when it comes to like temperature wise, or like if this patient has like a high fever and the red blood count cells are this type of number, like that would throw me off. Like I wasn't used to seeing that, but like our instructor told us, read the first sentence because it kind of tells you what that patient has, and read the last sentence because the last sentence usually tells you what to look for, like what is your answer. So I started doing that my second and third exam and my fourth exam also, and it would just basically just be straightforward. And basically like another tip that I can give out to you guys, for you guys just to get for you guys to get in the process of seeing case scenario questions on your exam. Like, you're not going to be seeing any more definition questions on your exams when you're taking this class. So a tip that I would give you guys is this study guide textbook. It does come with a clinical scenarios, and it just comes with like, you know, a scenario question. You know, Miss Tanka, age 76, was brought into an urgent care facility because she fell when she stood up after sitting all afternoon in her apartment. She lives alone. Okay. Although slow to answer questions, Miss Tanka states she has muscle weakness, muscle cramping, and constipation. So that kind of gives you an idea of what you are looking for. She has had diarrhea for 3 weeks. That's another symptom. And then you know, physical examination is something that we did not get into, and then the rest of the scenario we did not get into, so I can't really tell you guys. But it does come with like questions. It does come with questions, like for example, what fluid imbalance does Miss Tanka have? And then Miss Tanka may have an acid-base imbalance, which one? So it kind of like tells you, like, and it helps you out so much. I would just what I would do, I would just do like the definition questions, which I feel like were easier to me, just because like I feel like I was kind of more used to it. And also comes with more scenario questions in the textbook. Also comes with more scenario questions in the textbook. Let me just read one for you guys. Miss Smith had a hysterectomy 2 days ago. So you're looking for signs and symptoms for hysterectomy. A nurse who is doing discharge teaching is discussing the importance of rest and nutrition. When Miss Smith interrupts, I can take pain pills if it hurts. She says, I'm a very busy person and do not have time to rest. What principle should underline the nurse's response? What I ended up picking was reconstruction and maturation enable a heel wound to be strong. So that's what I put for my answer. Of course it has like more answers, but I feel like this book helped me also a lot, just because, you know, it had like a lot of case scenario questions, and that was what my exams were based off on. They weren't mostly more definition questions, but they were a lot of clinical scenario questions. And I feel like you need to get used to that, because once you go into nursing school, you're going to be seeing a lot of case scenario questions. You're going to be getting lab values. You're going to be getting like, what is that patient's temperature, what is their background history, and you know, it's a lot. And I feel like you just have to get yourself used to doing clinical scenario questions. That's why, like how I said, if you are not used to doing clinical scenario questions, I would just recommend for you just to Google online, or you know, just purchase this textbook if you are going to be taking pathophysiology, and it would also help you out a lot. So for concept maps, here is one of them, how it looks like how I said, color coding was my best friend when it came to studying for this class. You know, I would just color code. I would write down the pathophysiology, the treatment and evaluation, the clinical manifestations, you know, I write down the signs and symptoms, potential complications, disease process, and there was more. I'll probably just link down below like a concept map example for you guys, for any of you guys that are going to be taking pathophysiology, just so you guys can use that as a reference. And I feel like concept maps helped me out a lot. Like how I said, it cut my time, just because, you know, I would just write down down what was on the concept map, like what was required. And if I did have like any notes, if I did end up like having any notes, or like you know, mnemonics and stuff like that, I would just write them down below. This one does not have it, but I think there was one. This one, as you guys can see, here are my notes that weren't part of this, but you know, other little things that we needed to know about the disease. So like how I said, concept maps are a lifesaver. And you know, I feel like if you start getting yourself used to concept maps, you are going to be using them once you start nursing school. This class was a prereq in order for me to apply to nursing school, so you know, it kind of gave me an idea of like how concept maps work, like what is required. And I feel like once I get into nursing school, like I would just keep continuing to use concept maps. So you know, for this class, start using concept maps. It would help you out. Like how I said, it cuts your study time in half. So those are all basically all the study tips that I used in order to pass this class. I feel like if you guys use the tips that I recommended for you guys, then you will succeed. It also just depends on how on the work that you put in. I did put a lot of my time studying for this class, just like how I said, because this class is hard, and you know, it's a nursing class. So I would basically just study a lot, you know, and I did end up passing with a high B. You know, I feel like if you put in the time to study for this class, and you do concept maps, you watch YouTube videos, use a lot of sources out there, then you will succeed in this class and get the grade that you want to get in. Like how one of my nursing professors told me, if you pass this class with a C, then you would kind of like understand the foundation of how nursing school is going to be like, or you're going to understand how those diseases are going to work. So I'm hoping you guys found all these tips helpful, and if you did, of course, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and follow me on Instagram. Of course, always leave your video suggestions down below and I'll be more than likely to film those videos for you guys. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye, you guys.